Hey guys, it's Kat and I'm back today with my 1 month, 1 palette series for June. So this is a series where I go through my makeup collection, and to give a bit of love to older makeup that I haven't used for a while, I'm picking out a palette and I'm using a different palette each month. And then I'm going to report back on how I went with using that palette as my main palette for the month. Now, I'm not using these palettes exclusively, so I can incorporate other shades or other products or other palettes, but I am mainly using this palette 3 to 4 times a week for the whole month, and the aim is also to use every single shade and let you know how I felt about that particular shade. So that's what this series is. If you want to see the playlist, we're halfway through the year, so this is the 6th one, but I'll link everything down below. Okay, so for June, I picked my Stila Eyes of the Window Soul palette. Now, this was released years and years ago, along with, I think, the Mind palette, the Body palette, and the Spirit palette. Some of those have since been discontinued. This is one that's still available, and they also, I think, released limited edition ones here, there, and everywhere. So this is sort of a typical Stila format, but this was one that I've also got the matte one. I don't really love it, but this one I really did love. And whenever someone asks me what's a staple palette that is a good for beginners, I used to always recommend this one. Now, I haven't actually used this in going on probably 2 years, so I thought it was a good time to pull it out, have a play with it, and see if I do still love it, or see if compared to my other palettes, is it not very interesting anymore. So this is what the palette looks like. So it's quite basic and it's quite nude. Now, the reason why I picked this was it's winter at the moment, and I'm kind of liking these sort of taupey colors. I'm sort of liking these sort of burgundy sort of colors, and I really wanted a palette that I know that I can reach for, create very easy looks, complete looks, because it's got the mattes, like the transition mattes, the matte cream, the deeper sort of colors, and the shimmers. It's got the highlight shades. It's got everything you sort of need. And this is also one that I've considered bringing traveling with me if I need to travel in the future, but I wanted to remind myself, can I use this exclusively? But also this month I've been wanting to try things like colorful liners and bright lips, and I thought that this palette would pair really well with it because it's more of a muted palette that won't clash with too many things. So that's sort of why I picked this. And let's just get on to what I thought about it after using it all June. Another thing that I do in this series is I show you the looks that I created, or some of the looks I created, to demonstrate each shade, and then when it comes to my favorite look that I created, I recreate it at the end. So this look that I am wearing now, I sort of show you how I got the eye look at the very end. All right, so what did I think about this palette overall? I really enjoyed it. I find that June went really quickly for me, and I found that I didn't have a bad eyeshadow day. I really liked all these shades. I think they apply very easily, and there were some duds. I will get to the problems with this probably at the end and tell you what I would do to kind of fix it. But I think that it was a nice quality palette. I am sort of used to really intense metallic shades these days that are sort of like foiled, and they're very pigmented. And these aren't that. These are nice buttery shimmers that apply to the eye, reflect a nice amount of light, and they hold up on their own. So what I mean by that is, if you actually saw my last month's Lorac Pro 2 video, which was my May palette, I found with those eyeshadows, the shimmers apply really nicely on their own, but if you introduce any other color that is a little bit more bold, like some of the mattes, the mattes will just take over, and you almost don't see the shimmers anymore. Whereas these shimmers do hold up on their own. So for example, if you put a really dark color down, you put a lighter shade over the top, you can see it. They hold their own, they layer well, and they're just really easy to use. So I found these to be very blendable, not too pigmented, so you might have to build up some of them, but super easy to use. So I really enjoyed using this for the whole month. I really like the split of the cool tones and the warm tones. I like the split of the shimmers and the mattes, the highlighters versus sort of mid-tone shades. But yeah, there were a few issues, but like I said, I'll talk about that at the end. Okay, let's start with the shade Light, which is just a matte cream shade. Now it's probably my most used shade. Like, I can actually see that I've created a dent in it, and that was because I used this to set my eyeshadow primer. So I don't really like to have a very, very sticky primer. It makes it harder to blend the mattes into the crease. So I tend to get a color like this on a fluffy brush and set my eye primer down, and that one, it worked quite well for it, but I found that this shade on its own isn't very pigmented. It's quite a firm shade. It did take a bit to sort of pick up on the pan. Like I would have to kind of, you know, move my brush into it a lot to pick up enough product, and it was just like, if you build it up you can see a little bit of light, but I found that this shade itself was more practical rather than pretty. So it was good at setting the base or blending out a shade or something like that. So it was very practical. But if you wanted to use it as a brow bone highlighter, or if you wanted to just have a wash of sort of cream all over the lid, this one didn't really have enough pigmentation to show up on my skin tone at least. So I didn't love this, but it was good that it was there because it was practical, but I feel like it could have been a bit smoother and more pigmented. Okay, now we're getting to Kitten. Now, Kitten is a very well-known shade in the Stila range. They've changed. It used to be, I think, an eyeshadow single. It was in a duo. It was in a highlighter. It was in the glitter and glow type products as well. So this was it's a very popular shade, and I know why. It's a beautiful sort of champagne pinky shade, and it's very, very buttery and very, very smooth. Now you can see it, hopefully does pick up the light. It is very, very beautiful on the eye. I did use it, I think, all over the lid a couple of times, but I mainly used it as an inner corner highlighter, and it was pretty. It did work. I did like it. So this would be some people's favorite shade. I think it performs very well. You can see, once again, it's not super, super bold, but it does have that beautiful light reflection. It's very, very buttery. It was very easy to work with, but I find that these sort of cool silvery shades don't really work on me often, so I mainly used it as a highlighter, but it was a very beautiful shade. So this shade here, Thought, is also a similar sort of buttery, sort of shimmery consistency. It's easy to pick up, it's easy to apply, it's easy to blend, but it's not super, super pigmented, but it's just really beautiful. So you can see it here. It's just a beautiful, beautiful taupe. So it almost looks more like a satin, but if you do sort of pack it on, it does have a bit of a sheen, but it just blends so nicely. And I really enjoyed using this paired with this sort of orange transition color, so this more warm tone transition color, because I really loved the contrast between like a cool lid and a warm crease, or a warm lid and a cool crease. And I really liked using this sort of shade as well when I would go more of a burgundy eyeliner. It was just a really beautiful shade. It's really great for winter. It's great for like an everyday smoky look without it being too intimidating or too scary. But it definitely is more of a cool tone, sort of all over sort of lid color, and I really, really enjoyed it. I'm actually going to jump down to this guy here, which is Substance, because this was a sort of similar shade. I used them in a similar way, but this was a lot more cool toned and a lot more sort of gunmetal silver. So this was more of a taupe with a bit of purple undertones, and this was more of a silvery blue, and I used them in the same way, and I thought they were both really pretty. You can see them side by side here. So hopefully you can see them side by side here, that they have that same sort of finish. They apply in a similar sort of buttery way. They're not super, super metallic. They're not super, super pigmented, but they just create a really nice smoky look. Now I preferred the taupe over the silver because the silver was a little bit too cool tone for me, but it did work really, really nicely, and I used it in a very similar way to the taupe there. So yeah, they're just different, but I use them in a similar way, and they both perform in a very similar way. So almost how these are similar, those two shades there are also pretty similar. So the one down the bottom is actually called Vitality, and that's more of a gold highlight color. So whereas this is more of a champagne pink, this is the same consistency, but it's more of a soft gold, and I really loved this shade. Now this shade I used probably a lot on its own. I'll just show it to you compared to Kitten. So hopefully you can see that's Vitality up here and that's Kitten down there. So they have a similar sort of finish, but they are definitely a different color. So this was sort of my standard go-to highlighter shade, and I'm wearing it today as well because just warmer tones suit me a lot more. So if I was just wearing a wash of light color all over the lid, I would reach for something like this. This was another shade that's got quite a big dent in it because I used it quite a lot. I also used this over the black, which I'll show you later. So you can see it does hold up on its own. It does layer quite well over darker shades. If you put on something a bit too dark and you wanted to brighten it, these sort of shades work really well at just lifting the look. So I really enjoyed this. It was my go-to highlighter color. You could probably put on your face as well and make it a really beautiful look. Yeah, they were all very, very nice. Okay, let's now talk about the two transition colors that I mainly used, which was up here and down there. So that is Individual and that is Heart. So Individual is more of a sort of, it's a matte sort of warm cork sort of caramel color, and Heart is more of a beautiful cool toned mauve, which is what I'm wearing in my crease today. Now these don't look super impressive when you swatch them. They are just really, really soft mattes, but they were gorgeous for crease colors. So these aren't like the craziest of pigmented, but they're very, very, very usable, because if you get a fluffy brush and you blend out a look or deepen a look or just apply it all over the lid, they work really well. There's a nice amount of pigment where you can see it on the eye, but it's a very controllable amount of pigment. It's not something that you put a little bit too much and you're like, oh my God, I've used too much, I can't go back from here. I found that these were nicely buildable, but also served a really, like they performed very, very, very well for what I used them for, which was mainly in the crease. Now, I also did create a look where I was using all mattes. Now, I believe in that one, I used the top row, so these ones here, and they performed really well on the eye. I was actually really surprised at how well they performed. I don't think I did that look very well, but it wasn't the eyeshadow's fault, it was me. But you can create full matte looks using this, and I think the mattes do perform quite well on their own, but I found the shimmers perform better. So pretty much these two sort of transition colors, I use them every single day, and depending on how warm I wanted to look or if I want to cool down a look, I would just alternate them. So if I'd go for something that's a little bit warmer, I would probably use the cool one to cool it down, and sometimes when I was using these sort of cooler eyeshadows, I would go for the warm one just to bring a bit more life back into it. All right, the last shade that's in the middle row that is probably one of my most used ones is this one up here. Now this is called Affection, and it is a beautiful, beautiful sort of like, it's not a bronze because it is not brown enough, not gold enough. It's definitely more of a burgundy copper. Yeah, I don't know, beautiful burgundy shimmery shade. And that was a shade that I think historically when I've had this palette, I've used that shade the most because it really complements brown eyes. I've really, really enjoyed it. I think it's a gorgeous shade. It's got a nice amount of light reflection. It applies really smoothly, but you can build it up. If you want it really metallic, you can apply it foiled, but it's just a really nice everyday color. So I really enjoyed that, and I particularly liked pairing it with this mauve. So those middle two was sort of like my go-to combination. If I didn't want to think about what makeup I was going to put on, and I just had 5 minutes to quickly put on an eye, I would pretty much set my base with this. I would go in with that all over the lid and then that in the crease, and I was done. So it was so simple, so quick. They perform really, really well. Okay, now onto the last column, and this one is where I think some of the shades are good, but also some shades are problematic. So firstly, I want to say that this shade here, which is gorgeous, but it's called Peace, this I found to be too close in color to Affection. It was a beautiful color and it was only slightly different. It's a little bit more plum and it's a slightly deeper in color, but I found that on the eye they sort of performed a similar way. So I did like Peace and I did sometimes use it and it made more of a smoky look, but I found that it probably wasn't super necessary in this palette along with Affection, because they both they both had a similar sort of undertone, and you can see that one has a little bit more light reflection and the other one didn't. Up in the corner here is Being, and it is just a basic chocolate brown matte. If you wanted to deepen a look, it was a really nice one. It was very smooth, it was very pigmented. I did use this quite a lot, not so much on its own, but definitely to deepen looks. I think it was a pretty, it's a very, very basic shadow, and it's not something groundbreaking, but it performs very well. Okay, onto the shade that is probably the worst shade of the palette. no, not probably, definitely, is Character. Now it's this one here, and it's very, very firm. So you rub your finger on it and you go, okay, it's picking up product, but it just doesn't pick up on the brush very well. The pan is almost sealed over, so it's very, very firm. Almost feels like you can't pick up much product. And this one, look, it's just not very good. So this one, it's definitely sealed over. I need to scrape some off to show you. So this shade is like a darker, cooler brown. So that is me scraping some off. So it's definitely not the most practical. If you didn't scrape some off, it just doesn't pick up very well. It's a little bit patchy, it's not the best, but once again, I feel like these are so similar that you don't need a crap one, you can just go for the good one. So this one is more of a cooler toned brown, and it's got a bit of shimmer in it. It's got a bit of like burgundy shimmer in it, and there's nothing that irritates me more than a matte shade that has a shimmer, because that, like a sparkle, it's not necessary. Have matte or have like sparkle. I much prefer, if I wanted a color to have a sparkle in it or on it, I would much prefer to have the basic one that works really, really well, and then like a sparkle top coat that I can apply over the top. Mixing them together doesn't work. But in saying this color it wasn't a complete dud, it just wasn't great. So because it does perform in a similar way to that one, like I said, you don't really need it. But when it comes to deepening a shade like this one down here, so Peace, I found that it was really good at adding just a tiny bit of depth without it being too overpowering, because you can't really pick much up on the brush. But that shade wasn't necessary. I think they could have got rid of that and put something way more impressive into this palette. Okay, last shade is Essence, and it's a matte black, and I was actually really surprised that this matte black is really, really good. Now, I don't really use blacks too often, so this was one of the last shades that I actually reached for in this palette, but as you can see, it is a supremely awesome black. Now, I did put this all over my eyes. I'll put a photo on the screen, and then what I did was, because I wanted to use it as the base to see how well it performs on its own, and I can tell you it sticks to primer really, really well. It doesn't like have a lot of fallout, so it doesn't just fall down your face. It's a really beautiful bold black, but also not too bold and pigmented that it kind of gets out of hand. I find that I've got some blacks that are so pigmented that even if you get a little bit of fallout on your cheek, you've pretty much ruined your base. But this one is very controllable. If you need to blow a little bit off, you can, but I found that you didn't need to. So I found this really easy to use, and it was very bold, and I was quite surprised. Then I went in with, I believe it was Vitality, so that light gold shade. I put that just on the top to see how well the shimmers sit on top of a dark shade, and you can see that it definitely does brighten the look a lot. So if you did want to go in with like a really dark base, these light shimmers can definitely lift the look. But the final look I created with that was I actually put a Stila Shimmer and Glow liquid eyeshadow over the top. So it was more of a kind of goldy green sort of look that I created, but the base color worked really, really well. And like I said, I was very surprised at how easy that black was to control. If you want to just pick up a little bit on a fluffy brush just to deepen a look, you can do that very easily. If you want to put it on more of a packing brush and put it all over the lid, you can do that and make a really bold color. And it wasn't hard to use. It sort of just behaved really well. All right, so if you look at my arm, you're gonna go, this is boring, it's pretty yawn. You've got some typical champagnes, you've got some typical like shimmers, you've got some warms, some cools, a black, some browns, and yeah, it is pretty basic when you look at the colors, but at the same time, I think it was a very, very well balanced palette, and I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I really, really enjoyed the looks I created, and the only two things that I would change about this palette, and this irks me because I would have loved to have seen this incorporated to make it a lot better. These two shades here, you don't need them. So like I said, this shade up here is very similar to the one above it, but just with a worse formula and a bit of sparkle in it. So I reckon they should have got rid of that one and put in a really, really beautiful shimmery bronze. Now I love shimmery bronzes, like almost I guess olive-based bronzers, and I love them. They're my favorite color eyeshadow to put all over the lid. If there was one in here, I would have piddled my pants with excitement. Also, I find that, like I said, these two shades are way too similar. So this one should have, instead of being this particular shade. I reckon it should have been like a deeper plum, either a matte or a shimmer, or it could have been more of a true like old gold kind of color, like a more intense kind of color, because the only gold you have is this sort of champagne gold. So I think if you replace those two with either a punchier plum matte, a really beautiful burgundy deep kind of purple shade shimmer, or even like a gold, and then also put in more of a standard bronze, I think this would have made the palette a little bit more versatile in my opinion. And I pretty much would have sung the praises of the whole thing, but I think the overlap was a little bit disappointing, and I think this shade should have been a little bit more pigmented and a little bit more smoother to blend rather than being a little bit drier. But I think this palette was great overall. I had a really good month with it. I really enjoyed it, and it gave me a bit of a break as well, because I'd previously been doing some colorful palettes, not super colorful, but like, you know, navies and whatnot in there, and this was just a really nice way to sit down and go, okay, some nude palettes, even though they look boring, they can actually be really great and really versatile and really fun to use, and I enjoy it. Do I think this is my favorite palette out of my collection? No. Is it my favorite eyeshadow quality? No. Are there like no flaws in it? Absolutely not. There are a few flaws, but I think it's a solid palette, and it's definitely one that I'd reach for to go traveling, and I think it's a nice beginner palette as well. I just wish there was a little bit more, yeah, I wish they got rid of like the redundant shades and really made it a little bit more special. Okay, so before I announce what my palette of July will be, I'm going to tell you what my favorite look of the month was. Now, there were a lot of looks that I really liked, and one was actually a really green, beautiful look. I didn't recreate that because it was mainly using this palette as like an accompanying palette, but also the Wet n Wild Comfort Zone, that sort of green shade. So last month when I was thinking of what palette to use this month, a lot of people wanted me to use the Comfort Zone palette, and I said that I'll incorporate that into a look, but I didn't actually use it as a full palette for the month. So this look I really loved. You can see that it's a little bit green, it's a little bit smoky, and this I used various colors and various different things. I used, I think, glitter on the inner corner. I used a statement eyeliner, but this was a look that I really liked, but because it was using mainly other things and using the Stila palette to kind of ground it, I didn't want to use it. So instead of recreating that one, I decided to recreate this look, which sort of sums up how I've been doing my makeup recently. A bit of a bright lip, statement eyeliner, and some really basic but really nice eyeshadows. And it's using my favorite shades of the palette, which are Affection, Heart, which is that cool toned crease color. For a highlighter is Vitality, and then just this shade to set everything and blend it out. So I just thought that that was a good look because it sort of demonstrates the colors that I liked the most from this palette, and also yeah, it was one that I sort of did often. Okay, so because I did go quite basic with June's palette, July's palette is going to be a lot more crazy, and it's going to be Urban Decay After Dark palette. Now this I think it was limited edition early last year. Or was it limited edition, or is it still out? I'm not too sure, but this is the palette here. I have used it quite a lot, but I haven't used it once again for over a year, so I thought it'd be a good time to pull it out. I think this is good for winter. There's a bit of color in here, but at the same time, yeah, it's quite, there's some dark colors in here that I could use as well that could be quite fun. Now, because this is an all shimmer palette, there's most of the time I'm going to use other palettes, maybe even delve back into this guy to use the mattes and whatnot to help ground this, but I think it will be fun going for like almost a complete color palette. So it's not quite an all color palette, since there is like a brown and there's like a brown green sort of color in here that are a little bit more easier to use, but there is some fun stuff in here as well to create looks. So that's going to be my palette of July. So we're going to get a bit more colorful. Hopefully it's a bit more fun, and yeah, wish me luck with that one. Wish me luck. Okay, so if you wanted to see how I got this eye look, keep watching. All right, time for the eye look, and I'm starting with my MAC Paint Pot in Utterly Becoming. Okay, so that's applied, and just to set it so it's a bit easier to blend on top, I'm using this matte cream shade here. You'll probably see as well, if I go pick it up, it's really hard to really pick up much product. It's quite a firm product, and it doesn't actually deposit much color. So you can just see that it sort of just sets it. Doesn't actually show up like cream or lighter. It's just one of those sort of eyeshadows that, I don't know, that are pretty much just good for setting the base, which is, you know, helpful to set the base, but it's not the most impressive sort of cream matte shade. All right, with the same fluffy brush, which is just a Morphe 504, I don't know if you can see that, I'm actually going to go in with this shade here, this sort of cool toned transition color. What I sort of like doing is pairing the warm shade, this sort of more caramel orange color, with the cooler shades, and I liked pairing this cool shade with the sort of warmer shades. I don't know, I just liked doing that, so I'm going to go in with that shade there. Hopefully you can see that this one does pick up a bit more color, so I haven't tapped that off. So hopefully you can see here that this matte does definitely show up. So it's not the most pigmented eyeshadow, but it definitely does a good job, and it's way better than that cream that I first applied, that you could see that it sort of, you know, sets the base, but it really doesn't add any color to the eye. Whereas this, you can see that it's slowly, I'm sort of applying it, you know, bit by bit, because I don't want to apply, like, I find transition colors, they can tend to apply a little bit patchy if you're not careful. So I'm just slowly sort of buffing that in, but you can see that that definitely has added dimension to the crease. So yeah, the other mattes do have a lot of color to them. It's just the cream doesn't so much. Hopefully you can see as well that that's like a really flattering transition color. Like, I haven't blended that super well around here, but I'm just going to put shimmer over the top. But that sort of mimics shadows really well. So I really like these sort of dusty purple shades for transitions because they look really cool. Okay, one of my favorite colors to use was this shade here and that shade there. They're too similar in my opinion, but I might use that all over the lid and that sort of to deepen it in the corner a little bit. But these are really, really flattering colors. I really enjoyed them. And you can just see that this is pretty easy to apply. Once again, it's very, very soft, and it might take a little bit of building up, but these are pretty foolproof eyeshadows because you know, they just blend on so easily. There's not much patchiness, there's not much, you know, mess or fuss, there's not much fallout. You just sort of put it on and it just is good. If you want it more intense, you can definitely foil it, but I think this is nice for just a bit of sheen on the lid. It's really pretty. And I'm going to put that on the lower lash as well, just with the tip of that brush. And if you've been watching YouTube for a while, you would recognize this brush. It's the Real Techniques base shadow brush, but they're not shown as much these days. They were like the thing to have back in the day. So I've just taken that quite far down. It's a little bit messy. I'll tidy it up in a sec. And then I'm going in with just that slightly darker shade, just on the outer corner. You can see that this adds a little bit of dimension to the look, but it really isn't that different from the color that I put all over the lid. All right, I'm back with that original brush and just that cream shade, just to sort of blend it out a little bit and help the transition. All right, just for a highlight, I'm going in with this shade down here. You could always go with that one as well, but this one's a little bit more gold. That's a little bit more silvery pink. And you can see that's a really pretty sort of inner corner highlight that you can just pop in there. All right, I'm going in with my ColourPop gel liner in Swerve. I'm going to do this off camera to make it a bit quicker. All right, so we're back with some pretty serious wing liner. I've also put just the Rimmel Cold Kajal pencil in brown just onto my waterline. And this is where the look gets a little bit more sort of interesting. So I've really been enjoying pairing these sort of basic colors with really interesting products like colored liners or glitters or stuff like that. So I'm going in with a JD Glow Cosmetics. This is a multi-chrome liner or galaxy liner in Translade. So that's the color there. It sort of goes blue, greeny, purple. So I find that these work best over a black base, but you can see that it just adds a really cool effect to a really, really simple look. So hopefully you can see the effect that that gives versus just the normal black. Do that one more time. Time for some mascara. And there we have the final look. I can't be bothered putting lashes on. It sort of also hides the beautiful liner. So that's it. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed that video and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.